Of the many splendid dresses worn by our nation's first ladies, this dress worn by Mary Todd Lincoln and on display at the National Museum of American History has a fascinating story. It was made by a former slave from Hillsborough, Elizabeth Keckly.
It's a three-piece ensemble of a royal purple velvet, which is a very fashionable color at the time, a color that Mary Lincoln favored, piped in white satin, and then trimmed on the evening bodice with white lace and chenille trim, and on the daytime bodice with little mother-of-pearl buttons. I think it's a very clever idea. This is a lot of clothing, so you can really take the same ensemble throughout the day. In the daytime, you can wear that demure bodice, buttoned up, long sleeved, and then when you need to change for the evening, instead of having to totally redress, you can just take off the top, freshen up, redo your hair, and wear that much lower cut, short sleeved evening bodice for your evening's reception or party.
In 1835, a wagon carrying Robert Burwell, newly appointed minister to the Hillsborough Presbyterian Church, arrived in town. Burwell and his wife Margaret settled here on Churton Street with their only slave, Elizabeth.
After the Burwells arrive in 1835, a member of the Presbyterian congregation, Dr. James Webb, approaches Margaret Anna and suggests that she start a school for young ladies. Margaret Anna accepted Dr. James Webb's proposal and opened her new school, the Burwell Academy for Young Ladies, on July 17, 1837. Here on a daily basis, Elizabeth is going to be cleaning the house, sweeping the floors, setting the fires each morning. She's also going to be responsible for gathering vegetables in the garden, harvesting herbs, and certainly she's handling the mending and sewing for the Burwell family and the students that attend the Burwell School.
The time was very hectic and very demanding, the time she spent here. Anna Burwell was running a boarding school. She also had a large family of her own, and the Burwells could not afford a lot of slaves. So Lizzie got a lot of work, and she was busy all day long.
And we also know that she keeps up a correspondence with her parents, Agnes and George, in Virginia. She writes a letter from this property to her mother in 1838, and she tells about life in Hillsborough. She says that she misses her family very much, both black and white, as she puts it, and she also fears she's never going to see them again. She says that she feels that she's doing the work of 3 servants, but she's regarded and scolded by the family. And she also feels that she could fill 10 pages with her griefs and misfortunes, but no tongue could express them as she truly feels them.
Elizabeth Keckley didn't fit the stereotype of the timid house slave. Even as a young teenager, she was willful and assertive, traits that didn't go well at the Burwell household.
Well, from what I can ascertain from her character, she would have been what whites called high-strung in the antebellum era. She had her own mind, her own thinking, her own ways.
Now with a young son, Elizabeth left Hillsborough and moved back to the plantation where she was born. But she remained enslaved to the Burwell family, this time to the Reverend's younger sister, Anne Garland.
By the mid-1840s, the Garlands make the decision to move out to St. Louis. And when they're in St. Louis, they hire Elizabeth out as a seamstress to bring in extra income for the family. So Elizabeth starts sewing for the St. Louis elite, and she quickly gains the reputation as being prompt, reliable, and skilled. So she soon reaches the level of modiste. She's a designer of the most intricate and well-fit gowns. By 1855, she approaches Hugh Garland and says, I want to purchase my freedom and I want to purchase my son's freedom. He says, sure, for $1,200, probably thinking that she couldn't raise the funds. But indeed, the patrons whom she had developed a relationship with and had been sewing for so many years loaned her the money. And on November 15, 1855, she and George are both emancipated.
Elizabeth stayed in St. Louis for another 5 years and repaid the loans that bought her freedom. this is her bond of freedom. Then she moved to Washington, D.C., where she set up a dressmaking shop, and her life took another fascinating turn.
Mary Todd Lincoln and Elizabeth Keckly met because Elizabeth Keckly knew that the First Lady, or the First Lady designate, would need a dressmaker. And Elizabeth Keckly was determined to become the modiste for the new First Lady. So she engineered a means by which to do that, and was very successful in developing this relationship.
Elizabeth is taken on as Mary Lincoln's sole dressmaker, and in the first 4 months, she's commissioned to make 16 dresses for all of the social events in town that season.
She likes a youthful style, so it's bright colors. The purple dress we have here is a good example, but she likes that low-cut look. She's likes to display her shoulders and her bust line. She was also distrusted. She was from a slave-holding family. Her members of her family were fighting for the South. She must, therefore, be some kind of Southern sympathizer or spy. So everything's stacked against her. She has a few friends, but she has no one she can confide in. So she turns to Elizabeth, who comes from a world that's similar to Mary's, someone who understands, who she can form a bond with.
Something else that brings Elizabeth and Mrs. Lincoln closer is the fact that they lose children at the same time. Elizabeth's only son, George, fights for the Union, and he's killed in battle in early 1861. And of course, the Lincolns lose their son, Willie, around the same time. So you can only imagine that these women who are spending a lot of time together, they're bonded in this tragedy and in their grief. On the evening of President Lincoln's assassination, Mary Todd Lincoln is asked who could be brought to her to comfort her as she grieves, and she replies, Elizabeth Keckly.
Mary is not the widow you want if you're trying to keep a government moving forward. She's so overcome with grief, she can't bring herself to pack up and leave. It takes a couple of months. Robert is impatient. Tad is grief-stricken, and Elizabeth Keckly is trying to manage these people and get them to Chicago, and she does travel with them to Chicago and stays with her there for a while to try and get her settled in. It's hard to imagine a better person that Mary could have had at this moment than Elizabeth, because she's certainly much more of a support and a comfort than Mary's own son.
In 1868, in an attempt to tell her story and to rehabilitate the declining reputation of Mrs. Lincoln, Elizabeth sets off to publish her memoir, Behind the Scenes, or 30 Years a Slave and 4 Years in the White House. Elizabeth's memoir is instantly controversial. Several letters of private correspondence between herself and Mary Todd Lincoln are published without her permission, and there's backlash. There's scrutiny from the public. They say that Elizabeth is a traitorous eavesdropper and has betrayed Mary Lincoln's privacy. For Elizabeth's part, she says it was never her intention for the private correspondence to be published. But ultimately, this memoir, when it is published, marks the end of their friendship for those reasons.
Elizabeth is doing her best to try and explain Mary to the world, the Mary that she knew, the Mary that they couldn't see. The problem is, in doing that, she exposes sides of Mary that aren't complimentary. They may help you understand Mary Lincoln, but they don't necessarily paint her in the best light. And, Mary is just horrified with the notion that that a trusted friend tells the world about some of her most private moments. And it's so sad. A friendship that had lasted through all these things can't overcome this, and it just ruins their relationship. This is someone Mary called my dearest and best friend, and they never speak again.
It was also unusual because she really didn't focus on all of the things that she could have talked about in terms of the injustices of slavery. She wanted to focus much more on her experience and freedom. She wanted to be a kind of progressive voice looking at the future rather than going back and describing the past.
Chastened by the bad publicity, Elizabeth Keckly retreated from public life.
In her early 70s, for a while, she had a job at Wilberforce University in the domestic arts department, but she returned to Washington, D.C. and lived out the rest of her life with very little attention and very few resources as far as we can tell. She died in a home for African American indigent women and children, an institution that she had helped to found when her life was better and her resources were greater.
She is able to rise above that an elevator level of consciousness and really, I think, have an American dream. So I think that she should go down as not only an industrious African American woman, a woman of color, but an industrious woman.
Keckly deserves to be recognized more for being a career woman at a time when African American women, if they were going to have careers, it was going to be in domestic work. And very, very few women, particularly in the 1860s, if they were women of color, could open a business, have employees, and have a business that was as successful.
So today, Elizabeth's memoir is seen as a rare and outstanding example of a female slave autobiography, and particularly the chapter on her time here on the property, her enslavement in Hillsborough with the Burwells, is enlightening for us as a site as we go forward and tell her story to the public.